Despite those reassurances from the Quebec government, concerns remain about how the law will be enforced and, of course, the use of the notwithstanding clause. Anthony Housefather is a Quebec Liberal MP who has been actively speaking out against Bill 96. I asked him about potential consequences inside and outside of Quebec. Mr. Housefather, nice to see you.
Nice to be here.
So you wrote an op-ed this week in English and French with three other Quebec Liberal MPs, arguing that Bill 96 fails to find the right balance in terms of the legislation. What is your biggest concern with Bill 96?
My biggest concern is, as an English-speaking Quebecer, it misdiagnoses what the problem is in terms of protecting French. French, as we all know, is a language that is a minority language in North America and vulnerable from international forces. But it's not the English-speaking minority in Quebec that is causing declines in French. And I think that the bill takes away rights of the English-speaking community in Quebec to do many things that we've done in English in Quebec since Confederation. And that doesn't promote French or help French at all. It just makes our increasingly bilingual English-speaking community feel marginalized and wondering about what its place is in this province.
I spoke to Mathieu Levesque. He's the CAC's MNA, the assistant to the Justice Minister, the Secretary to the Justice Minister. And I asked him specifically about healthcare, because I know that's been of concern to many Anglophones in Quebec. And he says you will be able to access healthcare in English. He reiterated what you've already heard from the Legault government, that there's no hidden agenda, that this is really about the decline of the French language in the province. What do you say to that?
Well, let me start by saying that I see no reason why then, if it's about the decline of the French language, that English-speaking Quebecers will no longer be able to get birth certificates, death certificates, or marriage certificates in English. Why, if I do a contract to sell my house to another English-speaking person, I will no longer be able to file that contract in English with the registry office. We'll have to do the contract in French. Why I, as an attorney, can no longer communicate with the Quebec bar in English. All of these things don't help one Francophone. They just mean English-speaking Quebecers no longer get services in English. And when it comes to what he's claiming with respect to healthcare, let's look at the general rule. The general rule in the bill, for the very first time in Quebec history, access to English schools is what is tied to your right to get government services in English. So only those people who were educated in English in Canada or whose parents were educated in English in Canada are supposed to be able to access government services in English, provincial and municipal, along with those who arrived in the last 6 months. Recent immigrants. After 6 months, and if you don't have access to English schools, you don't have a right to government services in English. And with respect to healthcare, they did add into the bill some provisions with respect to healthcare, but I don't read that as a general difference from that rule. I read that as in exceptional circumstances. For example, you're going into the emergency room, right. You're able to get served in English if you need to be. But if I'm looking for psychological help, if I'm looking for a physio, if I'm looking to get non-urgent medical care, I don't see this exception applies.
There was some reaction from your government this week. Justice Minister Lametti criticized the bill, said the federal government could intervene as it plans to with Bill 21 if it goes to the Supreme Court. Would you have wanted to see more from your government even before this point and even before it gets to that stage in the courts?
So I've been deeply involved in these discussions, sensitizing my caucus for the last year since this bill has been tabled to its implications. I've been speaking out against it. I did so when the Bloc had their motion on the Constitution last year. And I've been talking about the need for the federal government to take the stand that the preemptive and omnibus use of the notwithstanding clause is impermissible constitutionally. And I was very pleased to hear David Lametti, who I have great respect for as Attorney General and Minister of Justice, announce this week that we will intervene in the Bill 21 case at the Supreme Court, which undoubtedly is where it will land shortly after the Court of Appeals renders its judgment, because the preemptive and omnibus use of the notwithstanding clause is the same in Bill 21 and in Bill 96. So whatever that decision is in Bill 21, it will apply to 96 equally.
What are your concerns around the use of the notwithstanding clause preemptively in both of these cases, and what it could mean for minority rights writ large across the country?
What it means is essentially you're saying that the courts have interpreted a right, they've said a right exists, and that the government is not within its reasonable limitations and under Section 1, because every right is subject to what is reasonable in a free and democratic society in terms of limitations, the court has said that's not the case. The court has said a right exists and the government is restraining it beyond what is reasonable in a free and democratic society. So if you like the use of the notwithstanding clause in one case because for whatever reason you disagree with the court's judgment, the next government will use it to override a right that you do agree with.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this is the way the game should be played. Courts are there to interpret rights, and we should accept that. But what is even worse in this case, because the notwithstanding clause can be used, it's in the charter today. We understand that, and I accept it, even though I disagree with it. But what I don't agree with is where the court is not allowed to even opine on it in terms of saying that something is unconstitutional and striking it down because the government has used the notwithstanding clause preemptively. Yeah. This was supposed to be at the end of a long discussion, not at the beginning of one.
Let me just end, Mr. Housefather, on your concerns for Anglophones in Quebec. What is your main fear that as this moves forward?
It will drastically change the life of many people who prefer to use English as their primary language in Quebec, even though they are fully bilingual, and even though they want to protect and promote French. And I guess as a member of Quebec's English-speaking community, a community that is one of the most bilingual in Canada, where nearly 90% of our youth are bilingual, we just feel that this bill targets us in a way that makes us feel like strangers in our own province. And this is just not okay.
Anthony Housefather, thank you for your perspective today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.